And joining us today are Jill Morris, who is Executive Director at Palsy, and Mitch Davis, who is the CEO and founder of Biblia Labs. So I've asked each to just give a couple-minute introduction to their organizations and where they're coming from. So I will turn it over first to Jill. I'll stop sharing. So if you have slides, you can bring them up.
Okay, let me see if I can find the right one.
Great.
How's that look?
That looks good.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me. I'm Jill Morris. I'm the Executive Director of the Palsy Consortium. And I'm going to give a quick introduction to sort of what Palsy is about, and hopefully that provides some context for today's conversation. The first thing I'll say is that Palsy in the past has stood for the Pennsylvania Academic Library Consortium Incorporated, and we've recently gone through a process of future framing sort of with our board and all of our stakeholders in the consortium, and we've updated our acronym to a name that we think more accurately reflects sort of what we're going to be working on going forward. So we are now the Partnership for Academic Library Collaboration and Innovation. And inside of this updated acronym is really a drive to focus on long-term partnership commitments that we are making to each other as a community inside of Palsy. And I'll just share a little bit more about the organization here very briefly. Our vision is really just to be the trusted and preferred partnership for academic library and collaboration, collaboration and innovation. And we are here really to support cost-effective and sustainable access to information resources and services for our academic libraries in our region. And I'll say region because we are mindful of the connections that sort of closeness of geography, bring for us. And within all of that, there's a huge element of trust that is just so critical to the work that we do. We need to continually earn and renew that trust among our members. And so, with this idea of partnership, we have also really tried to pursue intentionality of our collaboration and to really help our members see where we're going down the road. Just a little bit more of an overview about Palsy. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization with a voluntary membership, so there's no requirement to be a part of Palsy, even if you are in our region. We do hope, and we know actually most of the academic institutions, at least within Pennsylvania, are members. We are 71 institutions at this point, although we're about to announce 3 new members joining us, and we're very excited about that. Our key focus areas within Palsy are resource sharing, which has historically been where we've centered ourselves, focusing on physical resource sharing, so consortial borrowing of physical books for the most part. We have also expanded, though, into these other areas, including acquiring our collections together. We do a lot of ebook purchasing, so I think that's part of why I'm here today. Talk a little bit about the models we've used there. Support for innovation. We're involved in a number of grant-funded innovation open source projects, including one that's focused on resource sharing, and I can share a little bit about Reshare if that's of interest. And then providing support for collaboration infrastructure. So being that sort of middle ground to facilitate collaboration. And we do all of these things by aiming to achieve our impact for our members and value for our members through relevance of our programming and services and through scale. We are very focused on prioritizing an inclusive environment that highlights and honors the diversity of the membership that we support. We have 71 institutions with very diverse missions, all the way from intense research institutions to teaching institutions, and finding the grounds to collaborate within that diversity is really critical for us, and we've been pretty creative, I think, about that. We are also here to enhance our community and partnerships. So we span partnerships within our community, but then also outside of it, nationally and internationally through the projects we work on. And our goal ultimately is to strengthen our influence for ourselves in our community, but also for the library community more broadly, in thinking about the work that we take on and start to tackle. So this is just an image showing where our institutions are in our region, but I'll stop there because I know this was supposed to be brief, and I will turn it back over to you, Todd.
Great. Thanks, Jill. Mitchell, we'll give you a couple minutes to introduce where you're coming from.
Yeah, thank you. And again, yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Let me pull up. Can you guys see that? Is that working?
Yeah, you might want to put that into presentation.
Present mode. There we go.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I did want to say a couple of words. There was one typo in the introduction to this, which was my title as founder and CEO, which I was in fact the founder and CEO of BiblioLabs. But as of last Tuesday, we became part of Lyrasis, and so we are now a nonprofit, and I am the senior director of BiblioLabs within Lyrasis. We're incredibly excited about becoming a nonprofit. We've been a mission-based business from the beginning. I was one of the investors and partners. We had others, and we invested in this for 9 years, and I'm incredibly proud that we had the persistence and the vision to, you know, build something that has now been validated as a real direction that libraries are going to head in the future. And I think with Lyrasis, we're going to be able to get there a lot quicker. So I'm super excited about that. And this is my first sort of public thing as a Lyrasis person. So I'm also excited about that. So I just put together a couple of slides that I just added a Lyrasis logo to, basically. And it is that, you know, our vision for libraries from the beginning has been to reposition them as the center of their creative communities. We do a lot of work with state libraries and public libraries, and so that's a little bit different in a public library scenario. But we also do work with a lot of higher education institutions as well. And, you know, the same tools can be deployed for researchers, for students, for doing MFA, digital exhibits, all sorts of things like that. But at the end of the day, it's about the library being the center of that community and having great software to make it super simple for the creators and the folks producing content in their community to make sure that's being archived in the library. We've also, you know, built a number of external partnerships, and many of our library partners have built their own internal curation teams to try to recognize and elevate the best digital books, music, all sorts of things, articles that are being submitted, and allow those interesting and items that are of a higher quality to be elevated and get greater discovery. So we have a number of different ways we go about that. And I think, you know, ultimately, I think at our DNA, why we're different than most library companies is that we are first and foremost a software company. We started as a software company. We never really got distracted by the industry and what the industry was doing. We just saw problems and wanted to solve them. Didn't get distracted by people we could have perceived as our competitors. And so I think being a great software company is hard. And I think we've become very good at it. And, you know, of course, I'm interested to see how that translates over to the new Lyrasis relationship as well. And then I guess, lastly, we do feel like, as I was saying, that the position of the library, yes, they are a distributor of materials, but that their role is changing, and the thing that they can, you know, be great at for the next 100 years, that, you know, there's no risk of Amazon or Netflix or any of those kind of companies disintermediating, is being great at local content. They have buildings, they have people, they have the will, and local creators need a path to getting their content into the world. So that's really, I think, what we're facilitating. And then just quickly, just the kind of 3 different areas we work in. We have a robust, wide SaaS platform that allows for the creation of content, the collection of content, curation of content, distribution of content. We are media agnostic, so kind of skipping over to the third one here, user experience. Our vision is that a digital library experience should resemble every other thing in your life. That a library catalog should not just be a aggregated set of links that kind of bounce you out to random user experiences, that should be in one place. That is obviously an easier problem to solve technically than it is on the business side. So, but it's still our vision. So yes, we do software, we do program support, and then we also just really build relationships with people. So we help them build community. We help them be good at community engagement. So that's just kind of a brief overview of what we are about. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitchell. So where do you, taking both of you having made some strategic changes in the last year in terms of the direction for the communities that you serve, what do you see as the emerging needs kind of at a high level in the community, and how can we help serve those emerging needs? So Jill, why don't we start with you?
So I think something we've seen a lot here, and especially spurred on by the events of the last year, is just an increasing need for collaboration in all aspects of what we do, and understanding that we need to rely on each other in new ways. And part of what we've done here, or started to think a lot about here at Palsy anyway, is how to continue to support a healthy resource sharing ecosystem in an environment where there's just so much disruption and change going on. Everything from our library buildings being closed for a period of time to changes in technology and the expectations of our users, which have increased, and really thinking about how we modernize our library systems in such a way that it supports resource sharing for all formats and supports the user experience, which Mitchell was just talking about, and discovery of the materials that they need. And we're continually having to think about not just our own little ecosystem here in Palsy land, but also what are those overlapping groups of libraries and political boundaries that we need to continue to support with our technology choices, and how does that impact, what standards are in place that impact our ability to share that information across systems. So we've thought a lot about, resource sharing in the very traditional sense, and now we're trying to think about how that expands and changes when you start to think about new formats, when you start to think about, lack of access to collections and accessibility issues more generally. We're certainly thinking a lot about collective purchasing and how we avoid the need for physical shipping of items when possible. And so we're thinking about all of these things in the context of how we share our resources most effectively for our libraries, and especially given the challenges of budgetary constraints that so many institutions are facing right now. We've got here within Palsy, we've got consolidations or integrations of our state system that are starting to potentially become a reality in the very near future. And we've got real restrictions on really what we can do when these institutions are facing challenges like that. So we are trying to do our utmost to share resources in creative and new ways. And I think that's really sort of our use case here is thinking more broadly about the definition of resource sharing, and then how our systems are going to support that for content in lots of different formats, books, whether it's physical books that we have on our shelves or electronic formats, and getting that actually out to our users in a way that is most useful to them. So those are some of the things that we're looking at here.
Yeah, Mitchell, from your perspective,
Yeah.
sort of emerging needs.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe this is coming from a place because we've been spending a lot more time with public libraries who I think are feeling this much more acutely. But I think the biggest challenge is relevance, just making sure in a digital world with limited amount of digital attention, how does the library remain relevant? How does it, no one is coming to work at Amazon trying to put public libraries out of business, but there are collateral effects of people just being really good at things. And I think that's what I think about the most. I think in higher ed, it's a little different situation because the users are somewhat captive and sort of have to use what's in front of them to some degree. So there's a little, I think, bit of a cushion there. But when that breaks down, they go to Sci-Hub. So it's a situation that surely does have an effect in higher ed. I think it's just a little harder to see because you're not competing for people's attention out in the, I guess, regular digital world. But so I think relevance.
Mm-hmm. And then from the perspective of interoperability, and how do those systems work together to provide those services? Do you have some thoughts on the interoperability needs of those systems? Mitch, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of our guiding principles has been that regardless of what business is sitting behind the user experience, that everything should feel open access to a library patron. Every other service they use in the world, everything is always available. It's there. They don't have to think about it. And whether something is truly open access or whether it's just open to people who are in the state of Minnesota or whether it's just open to the people who are on that particular campus, I think we have proven that you can do the hard work with publishers to get their buy-in to libraries having an incredible user experience. Not every publisher, obviously, but I think enough that you can meaningfully change that user experience. And particularly when you compound that with open access in higher ed, you can create something, I think, truly special. So, I think that's how we try to approach everything, is how is the person who's ultimately going to try to access this, how can we not drag them into, the Sturm and Drang of our industry and standards and all those sorts of things, because they just don't care.
Yeah, which is sort of driven by the user experience in the broader web, right? Just give me what I want. Jill, from your perspective, working across institutions, I would think interoperability is a critical feature that you're looking for in systems and services, because not everyone is going to be running the same system to provide the same service at 75 different institutions.
Right, it's huge here, and it is a huge focus for Palsy in particular, right in this moment. As a resource sharing consortium of all different types of resources, we need to be able to communicate across institutions and communicate needs to all of the different partners, publishers, providers that we work with, and to have those systems talking to each other. We're one of those consortia that will never all be on the same setup or same set of systems to support whether that's ILSs or otherwise. We know that we're all going to be different, and that's been a huge focus for us in partnering on Project Reshare, primarily because we were looking for ways to support the diversity of our institutions and allowing our different systems to talk to each other. As library staff and under some of the constraints that I mentioned earlier, we are very focused on wanting to be good stewards of our funds, but also to make sure that our users can find the information that they need. And we know behind the scenes how many silos we need to try and bring together into one place for our users to find what they're looking for. And I think relevance continues to be a problem in the academic community as well, not because we're not relevant, but because our users are accustomed to going out to Google and to other places where libraries don't always, we're not always able to get our material out there in the way that, maybe our users would hope that we could. And that's for all kinds of different reasons, licensing issues and beyond. But I think that, that is a problem that we try to solve here through interoperability. And so working on projects that support standards, being involved in the standards community, and getting our various publishers to talk to each other in certain situations, getting our providers of aggregation systems to talk to the publishers we're buying our content from. All of that is something that we see as sort of the roadblocks or the challenges that we hit up against when we're trying to present information to our users in a unified way. And so that is an area that is really, really critically important to libraries. And I hope that more libraries will become involved in the information standards community for exactly that reason. We don't always understand why there are roadblocks, where there are roadblocks, and we need to be involved in those conversations and advocating for our users.
Yeah. And Mitchell, from your perspective, are there things that systems could be doing, things that we wish systems were able to do, particularly if we're serving the public library community as distinct from the academic marketplace? I'm thinking about, as you were talking about open access and digital books, is there a free version of this thing? Maybe it might be a public domain work. Are there ways in which we could link those things together? Are there limitations in the systems that are preventing quality user experiences?
Yeah, I think so, and I think they're likely. It's hard for there not to be. I think to some degree. I think we have such a different perspective on the standards because we're coming from the perspective of an 8-person startup that just has to adapt to the world. Nobody cares. That's right. So if we want to ingest Oxford and Springer content, they don't really, follow much standards when you get a big load of metadata, but you just have to kind of deal with it. And so I think coming from that perspective, you have to build systems that can adapt to the kind of pell-mell implementation of standards sometimes. And that's just, I think, people and physics and life and people moving jobs and, a bunch of other things, that are really hard to fix. But as a small company, you don't get to kind of have a conversation about that really, right? You just kind of pick stuff up off an FTP and make it work. So, I'm sure my perspective will change somewhat now that I'm, part of a larger organization that does things a bit differently. And I'm obviously, eager and excited about that. I think small companies have a hard time implementing standards and big publishers don't care sometimes. So I think you kind of live in between those two. So yeah, I think the systems, just making sure that systems have, our system, we just make sure we have a flexible metadata scheme, and we make sure we can take in multiple identifiers for the same piece of content if they exist. We make sure that we assign our own identifiers, so we always have an identifier or record. Yeah, there are ways that you can kind of get back to that identification, but it's at the end of the day, it's just smart people showing up for work and getting it done, I think.
And then finally, Jill, last question for you. In this environment where we're trying to do more, we're trying to extend the service models, we're trying to ingest new forms of content, we're trying to deal with new business models. where do you see our current barriers to successfully moving us forward? You know, and we don't. I could give you the next 4 hours, or just turn it over to that question. But you know, just
Brian
a
shaking his
couple
head
things.
no. I think you know, many of our barriers really stem from in certain situations, it stems from a lack of understanding of perspectives that various you know, pieces of our supply chain and providers are trying to accomplish. And so I think conversations like this are really helpful, actually, in drawing out sort of what we need to accomplish as libraries versus what a provider or a publisher needs to support from their perspective. And I'm really glad about the work that NISO is doing in all of these different areas to support those conversations across industry types. And I think that goes a long way. I know as a library consortium director, and Mitch, we have 4 people where we're trying to support, you know, hundreds of libraries from not just within my own community, but then through partnerships and beyond, and then to try and understand what are the challenges that Mitchell is dealing with, or what are the challenges that other providers that we're working with are dealing with, and to create some kind of translations between and among those different groups is really, really critical. So I think to the extent that people can be involved in projects that support standards and requirements, you know, made of our providers and our various publishers and within the community, as long as what we can do is focus on the application of those standards to the very best of our abilities. And in some cases, it's not going to be perfect, but working toward the betterment of that application of standards is really critical. And so I know on the library side and on the consortium side, it's really important that that we continue to push for that wherever it is possible, and that we support our providers that are doing a good job or really trying to focus on standards to the best that they can. So I think barriers exist all over the place for a variety of reasons, and the conversations that we can have are one way of dealing with that. And I appreciate this opportunity in this forum today.
Thanks, Jill. Mitchell, last word from you in terms of barriers and maybe how we can overcome them. Join a larger organization, maybe.
Well, or I think the buy-in of the larger organizations is certainly key, right? I mean, you know, if you're gonna work with Overdrive, you follow their rules. If you're gonna work with Amazon, you follow their rules, right? So, I mean, I think the people who have the market presence and power, to the degree those folks implement those standards, you know, obviously that creates a lot of reach. So I think, you know, I think that's important, and I think these kind of forums are important because everyone's life is immeasurably better when there's consistent data formats and when that works the way it is supposed to work. So I think it's an amazingly important fight and an amazingly important conversation. I think DOIs certainly, you know, they're not being perfectly implemented, but as an idea, they're fantastic in terms of making sure that we can know what things are and where they are and that they're related to one another. So I think all of these standards are enormously important. I just don't think they ultimately you know, they get us a lot of the way there, and then that last little bit is human beings, right? So I think that's always going to be the messier part. So I think as long as everyone's having the conversation and there's a framework and there's a group of people who understand the framework and understand how to move things around within that framework, that's why it works as well as it does now. And I think the push to continue to get better at that is incredibly important. So yeah, these forums, these organizations are incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to leave it in terms of, you know, that's part of why we're here, part of why both NISO and BISG exist. So yeah, thanks for highlighting that, Mitchell. And so with that, we'll draw this portion of the segment, this segment of the program to a close.